Kevin, you caused all kinds of dis-ease because I have to follow you.
Well, I didn't bring an instrument, so that's
Dog and pony show. It always covers over a multitude of sins. It makes me feel like Lucy and Charlie Brown, and they were together looking up at the sky, and Charlie Brown says to Lucy, "What do you see?" And she said, "I see the Straits of Gibraltar. I see the Himalayas. I see the Victoria Falls. What do you see, Charlie?" And he said, "Oh, I was going to say a ducky and a horsey." And that's sort of what we got going on right here. So my topic is just like jazz. I've been around jazz my whole life. I've got coffee grounds in my teeth. Can you say that on live video feed? Okay. I pursued a career in music and was a college professor for 10 years and taught trumpet and whatnot before the Lord called me to seminary. And so this sort of comes out of that, and it's Al and I talking, and he helped me sort of flesh some of it out, but it's interesting. So I was reading a story. I was looking for just some illustrations of things, and I came across an article by a man named David Hajdu. He's a journalist in New York City, and he writes for The Atlantic, and I'm sure he writes for other publications as well. But he tells about wandering around Greenwich Village one Tuesday night, sort of a nondescript night, and he found himself in front of the Village Vanguard. Now, the Village Vanguard is one of those clubs that's been around for more than 50 years, maybe 70 years, and it was a place where the big jazz musicians would come to play. It's the only one from back in the bebop era that still is around. All the rest of them have gone away. And so he found himself there, and he wandered into the club that night. And he was enjoying it. There was a sax player there in his band. The sax player's name was Charlie McPherson. He wasn't a particularly well-known player or anything. His band wasn't particularly well-known. The place wasn't full of people or anything like that. And he sat down to hear some jazz. But what jumped out to him was the trumpet player who was facing the back wall and had his head down. And he was just looking, and that seemed interesting to him. Well, in the moment when it was time for the trumpet player to play a solo, he turned around, and David Hajdu was looking at him, and he whispered to the guy next to him, "Is that Wynton Marsalis?" And the guy said, "No way. There's no way." But sure enough, it was Wynton Marsalis. What in the world is Wynton Marsalis doing with a no-name band in a in a venue? He's probably played there before, but he wasn't announced. There wasn't anybody there. I think this is just Wynton Marsalis' way. I know about Wynton Marsalis going to Chile, where I grew up, by the way, and have been in and out of Chile all my life. I pastored a church down there. And I know Wynton went down there and was with some of my friends. After his big concert, he went to hang out with them at a jazz bar and played with them all evening long, just hung out with them. I saw pictures of all that. This is Wynton Marsalis. So he was there playing. And when it came around to the fourth song, they were going to feature him. He was going to play the melody line, which they call the head, but he was going to play the melody line. And on this ballad called "I Don't Stand a Ghost of a Chance Without You." It's a standard. It's been recorded by every big name singer in the world. Anyway, he was just playing it on the trumpet. And this is, let me read what Hajdu says. He describes what happens. He performed the song in murmurs and sighs, at points nearly talking the words in notes. It was a wrenching act of creative expression. And when he reached the climax, Marsalis played the final phrase, the title statement, the declarative tones, allowing each successive note to linger in the air a bit longer. I don't stand a ghost of a chance. The room was silent until at the most dramatic point, someone's cell phone went off. Blaring a rapid sing-song melody and electronic beeps, people started giggling and picking up their drinks. The moment, the whole performance unraveled. And then he says, Marcellus paused for a beat, motionless and his eyebrows arched. I scrawled on a sheet of notepaper, magic ruined. The cell phone offender got up, left the room. The chatter in the room grew louder. Still frozen at the microphone, Marcellus replayed the silly cell phone melody, note for note. Then he repeated it, and he began improvising variations on the tune. Then the audience slowly came back to him. In a few minutes, he resolved the improvisation, which had changed keys once or twice and throttled down to a ballad tempo, and ended up exactly where he had left off, with you. And the place erupted. So what do we learn from that? There's two kinds of Christians. We can call them the reporters and the musicians, right? The reporters are the ones that scream magic ruin when someone does something they don't like. And the musicians are the ones that take the vitriol, the blasphemy, the offensiveness, the brokenness, the edginess, the sexual deviance, the sinful desires and tendencies that they see in themselves and in others, and they put it in the hand of the master musician who can play the music that brings freedom to the soul. And this is what we're up against, I think, in the church. I lived most of my life as the magic ruined guy. When people didn't do things that I liked, magic ruined. Write them off. And I think that's what we've got all over the place. I've been the reporter screaming magic ruin, and what I missed was the image of God in a lame cell phone melody. So why did that work for Winton, and what are the parallels we can draw? Well, it worked for Winton because, in essence, jazz is improvisation, right? So you can take all kinds of things. In fact, one of the big things you do in jazz is you quote. You quote. You take a quote from this melody or that melody and you incorporate it into your improvisational solo. People do it all the time, and when somebody hears a quote, everybody goes, oh yeah. There's this delight when people quote stuff. And so for Winton, well, I wouldn't have been able to remember the melody like he did. He's a verifiable genius, I guess you might say, to be able to remember it. So jazz is improvisation. That's why he could grab the melody and make it work. And that's what I think evangelism is, right? It's improvisation. But here's the thing. When I got exposed to jazz when I was in 11th grade, I came in and I heard people playing solos, and it just seemed like this free-for-all. You just play anything you want, and when you're done, and then you go on to something else. But as I began to listen to the music, as I began to understand it better, I began to understand that it wasn't quite like that. Yes, it was improvisation, but it was always over a set of rules, right? It always had a fundamental thing called these rules. And they were imperceptible, and somebody who is a great jazz musician can make it all work. It feels like they're just improvising. What I like to equate it to is like a language, right? We speak English. You can say anything you want, but if you don't use English vocabulary and English grammar, you're not going to be understood by anyone, right? You can improvise, though. I'm right here now improvising. You can probably tell. So I began to understand that improvisation was over a set of rules. And what are the rules in jazz? Well, the rules, just very basic. You have chord changes, right? And so you gotta play within the chord changes, or it's not going to work. You got to use the right vocabulary, just like in English. There's vocabulary. There's ways that you do this. In fact, if you're going to learn to improvise, the best way to learn to improvise is to transcribe solos from people in the past and to learn their vocabulary, learn what they do over certain chord changes. And so that's what jazz is. It's an improvisation over a set of rules. And it's exactly what evangelism is, right? It's improvisation over a set of rules. I mean, there are very basic things. We could talk about the theological rules for evangelism, and I don't want to talk about that here because we all know that. It's the gospel, and that's a very basic rule. You don't have evangelism if you're not at some point with the gospel, right? So that's the theological business. But I want to talk about some other things that relate jazz and evangelism. Some of the rules that I think are really important. I'm just going to talk about 3 because I don't have time to go. There's many, many, many. So one of the rules that I find in jazz, and you may think this is a little bit strange, but it's humility. It's humility. When you're on the bandstand, it's not about you. I don't think anybody shows this better than Wynton Marsalis, who can go be with a no-name. He could have filled that place if they would have just advertised. There would have been tons of people there to see him, but he just went in to sit in and hang out, probably friends with the sax player, looking at the back, and then when it's his turn, he plays, but really it's not about him, right? It's about everybody in the band, and it's about the music, really. It's about the music. I don't think evangelism is any different. It's not about us. It's not about our presentation. It's not about our magnetic personality. It's not about how wonderful we can be for people, how we draw people in. One time I was talking to a guy in seminary about planting a church, and he says, "Do you naturally attract people?" And I'm like, "I don't think so." "Well, then maybe you're not a church planter." Well, so I never planted. I'm like Kevin. I never planted a church, and you can tell I'm institutionally driven too. Where was I? I got off the beaten path. It really is not about us at all. In fact, do I want to go so far as to say it's not about the other person, but it's about the music. It's about the image of God that's coming from them. It's trying to hear the music together. It's trying to hear the music of my image of God coming out and their image of God coming out and are coming together and hearing the music and being delighted with the music. So humility is number 1. Number 2, listening. In jazz, if you can't hear the chord changes, you can't play jazz. You're just not going to be able to. Well, I mean, in general, in music, if you can't hear well, but there's different kinds of hearing, right? There's intonation hearing, and then there's harmonic hearing. And I was always very good at intonation hearing, but I love jazz, but I'm classically trained. I have 3 degrees in classical music, believe it or not. But I play a lot of jazz in my day. But I'm more classically trained. I'm driven by the notes on the page and hearing intonation. So I never was as good at hearing the harmonic flow. In other words, hearing what the chord changes are doing. And it's absolutely crucial to hear that if you are going to be a jazz musician, right? So the way it structures is you play a melody and there's chord changes on that melody, right? And then when you get to the bottom, then the first person will take a solo and he'll go from top to bottom again. That's called one chorus. The average soloist will take 2 or 3 choruses. The guys that aren't humble will take 8. And the guys that are very self-deprecating will take 1 and miss hearing it and probably take a 3/4 one because you thought you were at the end and you didn't hear it. So that would be me. But anyway, so you take these choruses. So it's very free. You take as many choruses as you want. When everybody's done, then you play the melody again, and the song is over. That's the way that works. But you have to be able to hear the chord changes. But here's the key to the chord changes, right? Usually at the end, the last two measures, there's something called the turnaround. And what the turnaround does is you know where you are and you know you're going back up to the top again. And if you miss the turnaround, you missed it. You missed it, right? I think jazz is exactly like that. I have missed the turnaround most of my life. I have missed the turnaround. Why? Because I was too consumed with presenting. I've probably presented the gospel, I don't know how many, hundreds, maybe thousands of times. When I was a college professor, every single one of my students heard a gospel presentation from me, every single one of them. And I did that EE outline, and I had it bam, bam, bam. And how many people did I see come to Christ? Not one. I had two guys, for example, who were running a porn website to earn money through college, right? These are the kinds of folks I was dealing with, but I was giving them an intellectual. I couldn't hear the turnaround. I didn't want to hear the turnaround. I didn't ask them anything. I was presenting. And it was incredibly ineffective. So I think hearing the turnaround is such a huge thing. And here's the third one, and this may be strange too, but if you're going to be a good jazz musician and you're going to be a good evangelist, I think there has to be enjoyment. You got to love the music. You have to be able to celebrate when you can't be so self-consumed. It has to be about the music, that when somebody plays a redonkulous lick, that you're like, wow, that you can go, oh, wow, that was so awesome. Sort of like what you guys have all done here this week. I've been like, oh my word, that's unbelievable. And then the non-humility comes in. I'm saying I got to follow all that. So, but that's another thought. Thank you. I think we have to be amazed at the music. And what's the music? It's the image of God flowing from people. From people. I don't think we can be the people that are always magic ruined. I think this Anglican Union is so cool. They want to hear the music. That's what they want to hear. Not getting all wrapped up around the axle about it. Praise God for that. The enjoyment. So I asked Al one day, I was on a video call with him, and he was in Italy. And we were talking, he was in a bar. And suddenly he looks up, and his face lightens up. And then he looks at me and says, I got to call you back. I forget exactly what he says, but I see some tattoos on the other side. Bright face. This is what he's living for, right? And so the next conversation we had, I said, okay, Al, I see the need for evangelism. I think it would benefit the church. I think it would benefit society. I think it would benefit me. I just don't want to do it. I don't care that much. That's the truth. And so we had this conversation. I said, how did you get your heart so engaged that you love it? It's what makes you breathe, what makes you want to do this. How did you do that? And he says, Genesis 1, man. Genesis 1. So I've been doing the Genesis 1 thing, sitting out by a fire, trying to enjoy God, because the music comes from him, right? If I don't enjoy God, I'm never going to enjoy somebody around me, especially somebody that's just ruining the magic all over the place. And there's people around me everywhere that are ruining the magic, and I wish they would stop, especially when I get in a car. You know what I'm saying? This is how we are, I think, so much. You got to enjoy it. You got to hear the music. So that's my third point. I want to end by just telling you, am I out of time? Okay. I just want to end by telling you a story of grace. And I would like to tell you that it was in the wild, but it's not. It was with my daughter. And she'd been rebellious in high school. She hadn't done anything really bad, but she was deceiving us. And we caught her lying to us. And, we clamped down on her, whatever. But when she was a senior in high school, this was in Santiago, Chile. When she was a senior in high school, she went to a YWAM camp. They call it Hukum there. And they're all flaming charismatics, and I say that in a good way, in a positive way. But she came to Christ at that camp, right? She came to Christ at that camp. And I thought, man, that's awesome. This is so great. But when she went to college, and then after college, when she became a flight attendant for Delta, and she lived out of New York City, what I didn't know was that she really was living a double life. And one day, I got a call. I was at the movies, and she said, "Is Mom there with you? I need to say something to you guys." And I'm like, "No, she's not." I'm like, "I can't watch the movie now." I run out of the movie. I say, "You got to tell me, whatever it is, you just got to tell me." And she says, "I'm pregnant." And that was a kick in the gut for me, because I have it together. And my family has it together. That we just do. We're just good people. I'm a third-generation Presbyterian pastor. The holiness just wafts from me. You could probably tell when I came in the room. She says, "I'm pregnant." I didn't even know she'd been sexually active. I had no idea. That's how clueless I was. But here's what happened. That somehow God let me hear the turnaround. And I said to her, my first words to her were, "Babies aren't accidents in God's economy." And she repeats that phrase to me over and over. She's married now, and her son's been adopted by her husband, and they have another kid, and they're walking with Jesus. They're in a church plant. I mean, it's a story of grace upon grace upon grace. But I think that hearing the turnaround makes such a difference. It's called showing grace to people. So I thought I would do something for you here. I'm not a great singer or anything, but I'm going to try. And this is a song that I wrote for Kimmy. This is my daughter. I have 3 daughters, but for this particular daughter, Kimmy, when she was born back in 1991. And then when she got married, I put words to it. And I sang it for her at the rehearsal dinner and played a little bit. So I'd just like to end that way with you guys. There I am. It's a little jazz waltz called Waltz for Kimmy. Can you crank that up a little more? Can you start it over? There we go. How can I, in my wildest dreams, tell you just what you mean to me? My sweet girl, you're my little girl, pretty polished, a gorgeous pearl. God in all his wisdom's might gave you to us that winter's night. 1,000 angels burst in song when Kimmy Grace was born. Gift from God, that's what's in my heart. Beautiful
beautiful like a work of art. My sweet girl, you're my little girl, pretty, polished, a gorgeous pearl. How can I, in my wildest dreams, tell you just what you mean to me? My sweet girl, you're my little girl, pretty, polished, a gorgeous pearl. God in all his wisdom's might gave you to us that winter's night. 1,000 angels burst in song when Kimmy Grace was born. Gift from God, that's what's in my heart. Beautiful like a work of art. My sweet girl, you're my little girl. You're pretty, you're polished, a gorgeous pearl. You're pretty, you're polished, a gorgeous pearl. You're pretty, you're polished,